Welcome back. Now to our RFL profile of New York Assemblywoman Amy Paulin. The Democrat has always been a particularly strong voice for women and children, and it turns out her personal story has played a large part in the work that she's done. RFL senior political producer Karen McBride joins us now with Assemblywoman Paulin's story. Karen?
Thank you, Andrew. That's right. The Assembly member was instrumental in changing child marriage laws in New York. She also wrote and sponsored the bill that eliminated the statute of limitations for rape. She considers that one of her most important legislative accomplishments. But that effort came at a price, reliving a painful part of her past. And I sat down with Amy Paulin to learn why. Assemblywoman, you recently opened up about a very painful part of your past, being raped when you were 14 years old. What prompted you to do that?
Well, I don't know that there was anything that one day I decided I'm going to speak out, but I was working on legislation. This is now 11 years ago, and we had a Democratic conference to make a decision about whether that legislation was going to pass the Assembly or move forward, and in what way. And it was to eliminate the statute of limitations on rape. So I had prepared a very organized conference. I had lined up all the members of the Democratic conference that supported my bill, which was to eliminate the statute of limitations. And when we went in, there was an expectation that I go first and speak, because it's my bill. So I put my name on the list and raised my hand. And opposite me, almost the same distance as I'm sitting here from you, was someone who I grew up with, because he was now an Assembly member, Alan Maisel from Brooklyn, and he was someone who would know the person who raped me when I was 14, and in fact was one of the members of the Assembly who really knew me as a child and knew the person, knew the situation, knew everything. And somehow when I got up to speak and talk about, how rape is this for women and rape is that for women, all of a sudden my story blurted out of my mouth. And I think intuitively I knew that if I spoke out, it would be much harder to be negative about the bill. The Assembly is not a place that likes to take away or to impose more penalties on perpetrators. They believe strongly in protecting people in that way. And so the drama of the story changed the way the conference went. In fact, after me, 2 more people, right consecutively, so I don't even know how many it would have been. It was just the 2 next speakers spoke about their own personal situation. Neither of them had been personally raped, but one, their sister had been raped and in fact committed suicide, and another one whose daughter was raped. And so you had this series of stories, and at that point there was nothing to decide. We were doing the bill. It was an emotional moment. It's hard to know why, but it did help advance the bill.
Sure, you opened the door and the bill, of course, passed successfully. But how difficult was it for you to sort of relive that? And your colleagues must have been stunned.
I had put the issue very much on the side and moved on with my life, and it was there, but it was not something I dealt with every day, and certainly not something that I deal with every day now. So when I spoke about it, it was as if that other person that wasn't me was talking about it. That person that I had put aside that it happened to was talking, and it still feels that way. It still feels that way. It's the only way that I can feel comfortable with it.
Why didn't you speak about it earlier?
Well, I was political even at 14, so I was going to a Democratic club, and it was one of the active members of the club who actually was my perpetrator, and I didn't want my life to change. I didn't want my mom, my dad to say, "Oh, you can't do that anymore. You can't do this anymore." I didn't want my life to change. So I knew again, that it was likely to be a big deal if I talked about it, and I didn't want a big deal. So I just decided I wasn't going to.
If you could go back in time, would you have reported the rape?
No, I would not. Because it was not a time that was friendly to women. I think we're still not there 100%, but we're better. And if I knew what I know now, I absolutely wouldn't have. I do feel badly because I know he attacked other people. But what I also know is that the court system would have protected him.
And let's talk about some of the bills that you pushed through. Certainly the work you've done for domestic violence and also the sex trafficking.
So, you know, when I first got to the Assembly, you know, you have credibility where you've come from, more so than where you might want to get to. So when I had been the executive director of my sister's place, and I said, okay, let's look at some of the laws as it pertains to domestic violence. So immediately, almost immediately, within the first couple of years, I was able to lengthen the orders of protection for victims of domestic violence, both in criminal court and in civil. So those are longer because of my bills, my laws. You know, in light of, you know, what everybody's talking about guns, you know, and we're grateful to the governor for pushing the SAFE Act in New York. But before that, you know, I was the only legislator that passed 2 gun control measures because they were really to protect victims of domestic violence. And I'm very proud of that. I try to listen very closely to the domestic violence community because as things change, the laws may need to be adapted accordingly. And so I'm always in touch and always trying to be a partner with them. And that's really what led me to the issue of human trafficking. Mm-hmm. When I first heard about human trafficking, I, like probably most people, thought, oh, it's girls that are coming from Thailand, mm-hmm. you know, from China, from other places, and they are transported here illegally, and therefore they're marketed on the streets because they have no ability to protect themselves. Their passports are stolen. This was my image. Right. And when I met with the domestic violence advocates, primarily in Manhattan at the time, they were seeing a lot of human trafficking victims, and they weren't foreigners. They were our girls. Right. So it's typically a runaway girl running away from sometimes a very good home, ends up on the street, and these pimps are very clever in, I'll take care of you, come to my house, I'll feed you. You know, remember, they're runaways. Sure. So they do that and they get trapped. And then, you know, 2 things happen. The girls think they're in love with them. You know, they're babies, but they think they're in love with these guys. And 2, you know, they threaten them. They say, I'm going to drag your sister into this. I'm going to hurt your parents. Mm-hmm. And so the girls are trapped by fear, and they're trapped by what they think is love. And they stay in this situation. And then it's a little similar to what I feel, you know, as a victim of sexual assault. You feel that somehow it's your fault, and if you tell someone, they're going to blame you, and it's got to be extraordinarily magnified for someone who's raped repeatedly, as is a victim of human trafficking. And so it's hard to come forward. They get trapped for a while. And, you know, when they come out of it, they're damaged and bruised, and we need to help them. And
you were also instrumental in changing the child marriage laws in the state. And another thing that, as you mentioned with the sex trafficking, that you wouldn't think would be an issue here.
You know, yes, I had read about I read an op-ed in the paper, in the Times, and I was shocked to find out that in New York you could get married at 14. Mm. And just, again, knew that, you know, that it was much more likely that an older man was marrying that 14-year-old. And that proved to be the case with most of the stats. So it was a much more 20 years their senior, 30 years their senior, marrying this young girl. And you know, she can't even go to the movies. You know, she can't go to an R-rated movie without her new husband. She couldn't get divorced. She couldn't go into a domestic violence shelter if she was abused. It was shocking to me. And although we don't see a lot of girls getting married, or didn't see a lot of girls getting married that young, we did see some. Mm-hmm. So I'm very pleased that New York, that my colleagues agreed with me and that we've changed the law.
And what message do you have for women or others in facing similar situations? What would you like to tell them today?
I think the most important thing is to find the way that they're going to be able to move on with their lives and to protect themselves. And if they need help to get it, and that it's easier to come forward, and there's many more people who would help them if that's what they want to do. But first and foremost, as a victim, to be very conscious that your first obligation is to yourself.
Well, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your story with us. And thank you also for all of your efforts on behalf of others.
Well, thanks. Thank you.
Nice work, Karen. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll be right back. More RFL right after this.